Hi, so in this video I'm going to go through this topic map showing the key ideas behind cloud computing and big data, KF732. Firstly, we'll be working with a little bit of networking so we can use cloud services. If you've not used networking ideas before, we'll be generally speaking using commands typed into the terminal application or PowerShell. So you'll find PowerShell in Windows, just on the standard menu, and you'll find the terminal application on Mac or Linux. And we'll be using SSH, which runs on port 22, so that's secure shell. Generally speaking, you'll be given the commands that you need to type, and so there's no need to get too concerned about that. But if you haven't used the terminal application before, then do have a look at that. Key cloud ideas are given by these various terms here. So we have IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, which refers to using hardware or storage services directly. We have platform as a service, which generally speaking involves running pre-configured applications over infrastructure. And we have software as a service. So you'll already have met software as a service through, for example, Microsoft 365, Google Docs, or similar. We're less interested in SaaS because it doesn't involve any deep knowledge. Big idea in cloud at the moment is serverless, where essentially you design your software, hand it over to the cloud provider, and they actually specify and start the servers that are going to run. So it's not actually serverless at all. There is a server, it's just that you don't need to worry about the configuration. The cloud service provider that we'll be using will be Microsoft Azure, or Azure as it's often called, and we'll be looking at some specific services. When we do look at Azure, you'll see that there are multiple services. We'll be primarily looking at instances, compute servers, which is infrastructure as a service. We'll be looking at storage. So that is, it says blob, those are binary large object stores. We'll also be looking at container instances. I'll explain what that is later on. And again, coming back to this typing theme, very often, even though these generally Azure uses a GUI, graphic interface, quite often you want to abbreviate commands rather than going through the graphic routine. You want to pre-save these and use the command line interpreter, CLI, which is essentially a cloud-based version of PowerShell, as we'll see. So that's the cloud side, and there's probably multiple ways that we could arrange this. We're obviously looking at big data and big data software, and what we mean by that, particularly we'll be looking at Apache Spark. Spark is a software which is written in Java. It runs on the Java virtual machine. It's written in a language which compiles on that machine called Scala. However, we'll be using a Python interface to that. When we look at the architecture that Spark offers, this is the idea is to distribute big data across multiple servers transparently, so we don't need to worry about how it happens. And that's done using resilient distributed data sets, or RDDs. That is the low-level element of that Spark uses. Mostly, though, when we're actually doing our applications, we use data frames which are built on top of RDDs, and we can interface through them or using them using Spark SQL, which is SQL-like So it looks like the SQL you might know already, with the exception that RDDs are unchangeable. So you can't do inserts or updates. We can only do select operations and copies. And we'll see there's a functional interface through that. So generally speaking, each of these topics will be spending about a week on these different topics. Later on in the module, we'll be looking at performance. Performance is a big issue here. And there's two elements of performance which are part of the Spark system. One is caching, because Spark emphasizes using memory on a distributed cluster rather than being disk-based. And we also have a large amount of monitoring which is possible. Looking at applications that we might be using. So these are Spark. I'll just shrink that one. So these are applications of the Spark platform. So we'll be spending a week or 2 weeks on visualization. So what does our data look like? And various graphic techniques to do that. Descriptive statistics of that data. So these will be linked together. Building on that, we'll be looking at some time series that we can derive from our data. And we'll also look at some machine learning, which is a key part of the Spark architecture. I've got down here a couple of other words we'll be looking at. You're probably wondering how we're going to do all that programming. I've mentioned we're using the Python interface, and we'll be using Jupyter notebooks for that. The recommendation is that you do not install Python and then your own Jupyter notebooks, because we'll actually be using a container system. So the module software is actually based on Docker containers, and the advantage of this arrangement is that you can use exactly the same configuration as on Azure as on your local machine. And that means there is one software platform for the module, no matter what your hardware architecture, and you will be required in the end to deliver something which is compatible with running that container on Azure. So we'll be going through these all these different items week by week. The idea here was to just give you a high level overview of the module.